Thanks everyone for your interest in the Tennessee Teacher of the Year program. Today we are here for reviewing the Tennessee Teacher of the Year application part 1. I am Sarah Brown and I am the coordinator of educator recognition and communication for the educator effectiveness team at the Tennessee Department of Education. So here we have our best for all squares. This particular program is living in this little yellow educator square here in the corner, the bottom right corner, because they're all corners. Tennessee will set a new path for the education profession and be the top state in which to become and remain a teacher and leader for all. So in this webinar, we're going to provide an overview of the Part 1 application and best practices as you approach it. So we're going to look at Part 1, application components, approaching the response questions. Then we're going to look at the optional supporting documentation. We'll talk a little bit more about application scoring, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Some program goals. The goal of the Tennessee Teacher of the Year program is to recognize and celebrate the wealth of excellent teachers that exist across the state. We applaud teachers who devote their professional lives to enriching the lives of Tennessee students and who demonstrate exceptional gains in student achievement. This webinar will provide an overview of the Tennessee Teacher of the Year selection process and benefits of participation. So our learning objectives for today. Following the completion of this training, learners will be able to identify the components of the Tennessee Teacher of the Year Part 1 application and identify best practices for approaching each component. A few norms. Please remain on mute throughout the session until asked to unmute and share. And if you have any questions or comments throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat. All right, so with that, go to your chat and please answer the following question. What is the one thing you hope to gain from this session? Some more information on the supporting documentation, clarity on the application, scoring process, making the most of my responses, deeper understanding the application wants, scoring and application process. Anything useful I may not have thought of. Examples of artifacts. Okay. All right, we will definitely cover all of that. Anybody else? Okay. All right, so at this stage, you've been nominated at the district level. I think you know that. You now are working on your application Part 1, which is due on February 4th, 2024. So that is about 2.5 weeks from now, to continue to the region level selection process. You can find the Part 1 application on the Tennessee Teacher of the Year website, as well as the direct email that was sent to you by me. The Part 1 application contains basic information about yourself and your school, 3 written response questions, and an optional opportunity to submit up to 3 pages of supporting documentation. After all applications are submitted by February 4th, regional scoring committees will identify 1 region level semifinalist in each of the 3 grade bands for each of the 9 regions, for a total of 27 region level semifinalists across the state. All region level applicants will be notified of their application decision by April 1st. All right, so let's dive a little bit more deeply into the Part 1 application components. There are 3 main parts of Part 1 application. The first section is the basic information, and it is not scored. but it does include demographic information, information about your teaching background, your school and district information. Please note that the demographic information will not be shared with the review committee. And the Tennessee Teacher of the Year will be selected without regard to race, color, religion, sex, age, or national origin, and will not be discriminated against on the basis of disability. This information is primarily collected for program monitoring and evaluation process or purposes. The second section, response questions, includes 3 written responses that are limited to 500 words each. We will explore the questions more deeply on the following slide. And then lastly, the third section is optional supporting documentation. Supporting documentation is permitted to provide additional evidence for references made in your extended responses. Some examples of supporting documentation include student work, teacher effectiveness data, lesson plans, parent or community communications materials, etc. Supporting documentation is completely optional, and choosing not to submit supporting documentation will not penalize the applicant in any way. If you choose to submit supporting documentation, documentation is limited to 3 pages maximum. Any documentation over this maximum will not be provided to reviewers. All right, so if you can't answer in the chat, true or false, basic information will not be shared with the review committee. That was a mistake on me on the slide. It's 3. In the past, they had 5, but a few years ago, they've actually chose to reduce it to 3. So the slide is wrong, and I will fix it before I send it to you. All right, so the answer is true. Basic information will not be shared with the review committee. All right, so the response questions. So let's look more closely at the response questions. On part 1 application, applicants will respond to 3 response questions that each have a 500-word limit. So number 1 is, how do you know that your students are successful in your content area specialty as a result of your instruction? Include evidence such as data, stories, or anecdotes to support your response, and do not exceed 500 words. Number 2 is, describe a project or initiative you helped create which contributed to the improvement of overall school culture. What was your role and what is the status of the project today? And then please include evidence of student impact in your response. The third one is, how do you ensure that education transcends the classroom? Describe specific ways in which you deliberately connect your students with the community, and how do you collaborate with others? So colleagues, students, families in this work, and please include evidence of student impact. Again, 500 words. All right. So the written responses account for the majority of the points available in the application scoring, and as such, it's critical that the written responses represent your best qualities as an exceptional educator. Through a strong response, though a strong response may look different for each written response prompt, these guiding questions can help you ensure that the components of your application complement one another and give the most comprehensive view of your excellence as an educator. Things to consider. Are you answering the question? So take time to unpack the question or break down each part of the question and think about what it's asking. For example, in question 1, how do you know that your students are successful in your content area specialty as a result of your instruction? Include evidence such as data, stories, or anecdotes to support your response. The first part says, how do you know that your students are successful in your content area specialty as a result of your instruction? So consider, if I'm as successful as a teacher, what would I expect to see from my students at the end of the year? The quarter, the week, the day. In what ways can I describe what success looks and sounds like in the specific content area or grade level and context in which I teach? The second part is include evidence such as data, stories, or anecdotes to support your response. So with that, think about how do I assess my students' success on a daily, weekly, monthly, and or yearly basis? What stories, anecdotes, formative data, or summative data can I share that shows the success? I should clearly describe how I know my instruction is effective for my students' learning and growth. Additionally, ask someone else to read your response and ask if they can determine the question being addressed. Are you answering all parts of the question? So use the unpacking strategy to ensure that you plan for and address all parts of the prompt with sufficient detail. Are you giving a comprehensive picture of yourself as an educator throughout all responses? So try to avoid using the same example or idea in your response to each question. Your goal is to give a complete picture. And are you writing to show what learning looks like in your classroom? So write to show, not to tell. Use examples and stories of things that students, parents, or colleagues have said or done. Show how your work influenced the learning and growth of others through examples and evidence. Highlight your accomplishments rather than being humble about them. Write through the word count in your draft. Often it takes writers some time to get to the best part of their responses, so begin by writing more than you need and then strategically edit to meet that word count. All right. In the chat, back to the chat, true or false? Responses must cite achievement data to receive a favorable score from the review committee. Good job, everyone. The answer is false, and responses must cite evidence to receive a favorable score from the review committee. So evidence might include achievement data, but it may also include stories, anecdotes, behavioral data, or growth data. All right, so now look at the second optional scored component, the supporting documentation. So supporting documentation is permitted to provide additional evidence for references made in your extended responses. Some examples of supporting documentation include student work, teacher effectiveness data, lesson plans, parent or community communications materials, etc. Please ensure all supporting documentation adheres to your school and or district's privacy policies, so thinking media releases. It's important to note that the application, including supporting documentation, will be redacted for identifying information to reduce potential unconscious bias. As such, it is best to ensure your supporting documentation is still easily understood without school logos, names, or specific addresses. Supporting documentation is completely optional, and choosing not to submit supporting documentation will not penalize the applicant in any way. If you choose to submit supporting documentation, the documentation is limited to 3 pages maximum for Part 1 application. Additionally, applicants should consider the following best practices when compiling supporting documentation. Directly connect supporting documentation to the written responses, but do not rely on supporting documentation to make your case. Supporting documentation should not be a substitute for high quality explanation in the narrative, nor stand alone as extraneous information. Effective supporting documentation should extend a reviewer's understanding of your written responses by directly connecting to aspects of the narrative where additional evidence, such as student work, may make your writing clearer. Ensure that each page of the supporting documentation demonstrates the Teacher of the Year criteria. In some cases, you may identify that the written response prompts do not permit you to share characteristics of your teaching or specific experiences that fully demonstrate your ability to serve as Teacher of the Year. Like the best practice above, effective supporting documentation can serve to expand your reviewer's understanding of your ability to meet the Teacher of the Year criteria. To ensure reviewers understand what they're viewing and why it's important, be sure to provide notes with relevant information and context for any materials not directly addressed in the narrative. All right, back to the chat. True or false? Choosing not to submit supporting documentation will negatively impact your application score. All right, false. Everybody's listening today. Choosing not to support or not to submit supporting documentation will not negatively impact your application score. And yes, I realize there's a whole lot of negatives in that statement. The English teacher in me is cringing just a little bit. All right. Okay. So part one, application scoring. So you may be wondering how exactly the part one application will be scored. Each response question will be scored individually and will be assessed according to the degree to which the response adheres to standard grammar, spelling, and punctuation conventions, answers the question clearly and concisely, and provides a compelling narrative that speaks to the applicant's ability to serve as the Tennessee Teacher of the Year. Then the entire application will be given a holistic score, including both the response questions as well as the supporting documentation if it is included in the application. The holistic score will be assigned based on the degree to which the applicant demonstrates the Tennessee Teacher of the Year and the National Teacher of the Year criteria. Each application will be reviewed by 2 to 3 reviewers from across the state, and the top score in each grade band in each region will be selected as a region level semifinalist. So all finalists will be notified of their application decision by April 1st, and the part 2 application will be shared with region level semifinalists at that time. Okay, does anybody have any questions? So we'll be notified regardless of, yes, you will be notified whether you are moving forward or not. Any other questions? Welcome. Any other questions? Can you talk about more than one project in question number 2? I would, if they work together, I think you absolutely can. Thinking about 500 words is not a lot. It's really just a few paragraphs. So you may not have enough space to really develop if you talk about 2 projects. I'm trying to think of an example. So for instance, like if you're teaching something and have, like you are doing a graphic novel project, but then with a story, but then you're also doing some kind of a, I don't know, Socratic to get them talking about it. That may be something that you could talk about as, they work together to add the depth of knowledge for understanding and analytical constructs around a piece, but I don't know that you will have a lot of time to really discuss a lot of space to discuss 2. So the next question is, I just want to clarify our years of teaching experience, something that's taken into account. It's not. That is not even given to the scorers. We only use, like, we just keep the years of teaching for just reference data for us to see, just compare each year what kind, who's being nominated. So that one doesn't take any into account at all. The next question is, how is the notification received by email, or does your district notify you in person? You'll receive an email from me. I will email you one way or the other if you are in the top 27 or not. When submitting documentation, can we place a photo on a page PDF with a brief description? Absolutely. You can definitely include photos and then put a description on there. Just make sure that any personally identifying information is not included in that photo. And so none of the basic information is shared with scorers. Correct. None of the basic information is shared with scorers to the extent that when we send to scorers, we code names. They don't even get your name. So it's very much a blind scoring for this round. You can absolutely put more than one photo on a page. I would not try to cram like 10 photos on a page and make them really small. I said in the last webinar, this isn't like a high school chemistry cheat sheet where you're trying to like get as much as you possibly can on one tiny piece of paper. It needs to be something that the scorers can look at and see and grasp your story fairly easily. All right. Any other questions? Did I answer all of them appropriately? Do I need to go further in depth for any of the answers? Okay. So the Tennessee Teacher of the Year website includes specific program criteria with resources for applicants. There will be a guidebook that will be put up hopefully in the next couple of days that will also help, but most of the information in that is everything we've gone over so far. Additionally, can a link to a longer document be in one of the pages? Probably not. It just because that is it's also just not, that means it makes it more pages, if that makes sense. So it needs to stay within the 3 pages. We will have the 3rd webinar for those that are in the top 27. We'll have a webinar on April 9th from 3:30 to 4:30. And I will have weekly office hours for real now until February 4th. I'd planned to start them yesterday, forgetting it was a holiday. And then, so every Monday, and then once notification happens on April 1st, we'll start again until, we'll start office hours again until part 2 is due. You do not need to include yourself in the photos because that would show who you are. We're trying to remove any kind of personally identifiable information. So if you have a photo with you in it that you would like to include, I would try to put, if you're on a Word, if you're creating this on a Word document or in a PDF, I would put a shape over you so you cannot be seen. That would be the best way to redact yourself out of photos. Do the scorers see your resume with the personal information redacted? The resume is not in this part. They will in part 2. They do see it in part 2. but not this part 1. Any other questions? Okay. In the chat, as a result of this webinar, what next step will you take to prepare for the Tennessee Teacher of the Year process? Go back and revise some answers, revising your essays, dissect responses, have other people look at them. Use those snow days. I was thinking about that this morning. You guys get some nice time supporting documentation. Excellent. All right. Revising, revise, revise, revise. It's my mantra. It's an English teacher. Excellent. All right, guys. Thank you for coming. If you have any questions, please email me. If you emailed me in the last Thursday, Friday, and I did not respond, please email me again. I tried to respond, but I was out. And so please email me if you have any questions. I'm going to stop the recording right now.